All right, so our presentation today is focused on disclosing diagnosis as well as supporting siblings of children with autism. And you can go ahead and advance the slides. So this is, again, the last week of our 6 weeks that have been focused on social skills support for families. And there are some other activities that you can also participate in and find out more information about from UM-NSU card. And so if you're interested in looking up these activities and these studies online, you can go ahead and do that to find out more information. So today we're going to be discussing the idea of disclosing your child's diagnosis to him or her. And ultimately, disclosure is really a personal and family decision. We know every child and family situation is different. And our goal today is to really highlight different factors to consider in making the decision about whether to disclose your child's diagnosis, when to disclose that diagnosis, what you might say, how you might make decisions about who would be the one to tell your child, where you might do that. And then we'll also spend some time talking about supporting siblings. And we're really hoping that we're able to provide some guidance for how you might have an open conversation with your child if that's something that you do choose to move forward with. So the first thing we'll talk about are some of the different pros and cons that you might think about when determining whether you're going to disclose your child's diagnosis. And in terms of some pros, having this kind of a discussion is an opportunity to be open with your child, to give your child a community of people like them, so they may be able to understand themselves and connect with an identity and meet others that also have autism. Knowing about their diagnosis may also help children understand their strengths and difficulties a little bit better. We know that children, when they don't have information, sometimes jump to conclusions about why things might be the way they are. And so that can happen when they're thinking about their own difficulties as well. So without that information, they may have some misconceptions about their own areas of difficulty. And we know children, if we don't tell them, they may hear from someone else. So maybe they would learn from a teacher or from someone else in their community or a service provider rather than from you or someone within your family. And telling your child is also a way that you could show your child that there really isn't anything to be ashamed about, that being on the autism spectrum is just one part of who your child is. In terms of some cons to consider and to think through, telling a child about their diagnosis may feel like a really overwhelming task. It may be difficult to think through how you might do that and how it might go. We know that with any kind of diagnosis, there are labels and stigma in society, so thinking about the impact that might have on your child is something to consider. A child's self-esteem might be impacted by knowing about their diagnosis, so thinking through how you might manage that is important. We know some children may be in different places in terms of their emotional readiness to process this kind of information. So if they're not really in that place and they were to find out about their diagnosis, that could be challenging. And we know that a child may see themselves as different if they have information about one way in which they are different from some of the other kids in their class or kids at different activities they participate in. So there definitely are a number of different things to think about, both that might be helpful and beneficial for disclosing a diagnosis and things that may be challenging about it. In terms of when to tell your child, I think this is a really common question of sort of what's the right age? When do I know when to do this? And really there's not a right age or a right or wrong answer to this question. Instead, just like with thinking through the pros and cons, there just are different factors that are good to consider to help you decide when might be the right time. So your child's personality, their abilities, and their social awareness are all important considerations. So if your child has lower cognitive ability, for example, they may have some confusion around sharing that information about their diagnosis. It may be hard for them to process. Whereas a child who has more advanced cognitive ability may have a lot of questions and perceive themselves as more different if they're really able to understand a lot of detail about that information. A child's social awareness in terms of how they might have some insight or not have insight really into their social skills and how those skills might be different from some of their peers might help you think through when to tell your child. And really an important thing to highlight is thinking about what are you hearing from your child, and if they're asking questions about, why am I having trouble making friends, or why does it feel so hard for me to go somewhere new, or it seems like something's different about me. When children are expressing these kinds of questions, then that can be a good indication that providing more information could be helpful. And then it can be helpful to think about if your child has any other diagnoses and if those are things that they know about. So if a child is already aware that their speech development was delayed, or that they have anxiety that they're getting some help for, then knowing sort of how you talked about that and how your child reacted to that can be important to think about. And just when your child was diagnosed with autism. So this would have implications for how you as a caregiver and how people in your family, what your sort of readiness is to be able to have that conversation, where you are in your understanding of your child. And all of these things can help guide you in thinking about when it might be the right time. And then another important thing is thinking about really what to say and how to say it. And again, there's no right or wrong answer here either, but there are some different factors that can be helpful. So just like you would use the questions your child might be asking about themselves to decide if it might be the right time, taking the lead from those questions and knowing what to tell your child is also a helpful strategy. So being able to answer the types of questions your child is asking, and make sure you really understand what those questions are. So it can be useful to write down some of the key points you might discuss with your child ahead of time, so that you're sure that you're addressing what their questions are, that you feel prepared and confident for talking with them. And then starting with small amounts of information that are really related to what you think are the most important things for them to understand about their own experience and their own strengths and difficulties, knowing that you can always add information over time and create a more complex understanding of their diagnosis as they get older. Being positive with that small amount of information is also important. So making sure to highlight many of your child's strengths in addition to talking about what challenges they might have. It can be useful to talk about autism in a similar way that we might think about other medical diagnoses. So knowing that all people have strengths and difficulties, and that's true of those with autism also, and that just like with other diagnoses, there are many other people who also have autism. So that can be a helpful piece of information to provide. And then assuring your child that there's support there. So if you're able to make a connection to what you explain to your child and how the services they're already receiving or services they might be starting are related to helping them with those things that are more difficult for them. And to also highlight that children and individuals with autism across the lifespan have successful careers, they have families, they can achieve things that they want in life. And so helping your child not see autism as sort of a determining or limiting factor can be really helpful. So we wanted to give a few examples of different pieces of information you might include in this conversation. So if you're really focused on your child's social communication challenges, relating this to personal experience in your conversation could be helpful. So for a child who is overwhelmed by noise and might have trouble functioning in a classroom or in an after-school activity where there's a lot of noise happening, telling your child something like, many kids with autism share certain challenges. And remember when you missed doing that art project last week because all the noise that was upsetting you? Well, many other children with autism also have a hard time paying attention when there are many things happening around them. So really highlighting a specific challenge your child has and how that's something that other children with autism also experience. It's helpful to emphasize that there's a range of presentations of autism and that every person with autism has different strengths and challenges. So saying something like, many kids with autism have difficulty paying attention and knowing how other people are feeling. Some children can't use words very well, but everyone is different. You can talk just fine, but you do have some trouble knowing how other people are feeling. So emphasizing that there's a range of challenges people have. And then especially for children who are a little bit older and more verbal, it may be helpful to help your child think through how they might explain their autism and their challenges to other people who notice those challenges. So telling a child, you know how it bothers you to take a different route to the store, so we always have to take the same path. Some people might not understand that and why it bothers you. So you might have to help them and tell them, I have a hard time with change, and that's because I have autism. So it can be empowering for children to have some language to put to their experience when they're communicating with their peers who might notice some differences. Another thing we wanted to address is who might be the person to tell your child and where might you do that? So different families make different decisions about this question. And one option could be to have a knowledgeable professional involved. And this might be a psychologist or a social worker, or even a speech language pathologist, someone who's involved in intervention for your child and knows your family and is familiar with this idea of talking to children about their diagnosis. And involving a professional can sometimes make it easier for family members to sort of be seen as a support system in processing that information rather than the one who's delivering it. And that person can also then have a role in discussing your child's diagnosis and how it's impacting them. And if your child is reacting, in certain ways after they learn about their diagnosis, being connected already with a professional who knows that you're in this phase of speaking to your child about their diagnosis, they may be able to really point you towards resources that might be most helpful and help you understand your child's reaction. And some families may find it useful to have that initial conversation outside the home, maybe somewhere where their child is receiving services. But many families make the decision that they themselves as parents or someone else in the family and siblings might all be involved in this conversation. And we know as caregivers, you know your child best. You're the expert on your child. And so you may be thinking that you can tailor that conversation the best to your child's skills, their level, their experiences. And so it might be most helpful for you to be the one to talk to your child. And doing it this way might also help you set a less formal tone. It can be more of a conversation. And it might be easier then to have a naturally occurring conversation that evolves over time as your child has more questions about their diagnosis. And then finally, after you talk to your child about their diagnosis, there are some next steps that might be helpful. Some of those include helping your child explore different books or videos or articles that are written or geared towards other children with autism. This might help them feel more connected to themselves and to others within that community. Similarly, finding ways that your child might meet other children who have autism, whether that's through camps or connecting through Facebook groups or other listservs with other parents of children with autism to have caregivers and kids meet and help them feel more connected. And then, like I mentioned before, really knowing that having this conversation about a diagnosis isn't really a one-time thing. It's something that may evolve over time. So being prepared to revisit that topic, to process it more. Your child may ask the same questions a number of times as they're trying to understand about their own strengths and weaknesses. So kind of knowing that that's very typical and that you may talk about it a number of times for your child to really have that information sink in. And knowing that expanding how complex that information is over time can also be helpful as your child develops and gets a more complex understanding of themselves in general. Now we're going to turn it over to discussing talking to siblings of children with autism.
All right. So I want to discuss a little bit about disclosing the diagnosis to the siblings and as well on how to support your children as they navigate having a sibling with autism. So it's a good idea to start talking about the diagnosis early and kind of revise and just to make sure that however you explain it is developmentally appropriate. So to a younger child, you might say, your brother just learns a little differently than you and me, so he needs a little extra help. Or your sister's autism means that she can't talk and has trouble playing like you do, but she still loves you very much. I have also another quote here that has been adapted from a piece written by Dr. Wendy Stone, psychologist, that could be useful for older children or teenagers as well as other family members. So those behaviors that we've been so confused about for so long. Well, now we have a name for them and an explanation for why they occur. Howie doesn't act the way he does because he's spoiled or because he's shy or because he doesn't like us. He acts that way because he has autism. Autism explains why he doesn't speak or use gestures and why he doesn't seem to understand what we say. It explains why he's not as interested in interacting with us as other children in the family have been, and why he plays with spoons and bottles instead of toys. I know this is upsetting news for all of us, but the good news is that the disorder has been diagnosed early, and there are a lot of things we can do to help him. He'll be starting some therapy soon, and I'll be learning about things that I can do to help him at home. I know that you'll need some time to think about all of this, but if you have any questions, I'll be glad to try my best to answer them. So that's just an example of how you could kind of bring that up to the family. So when explaining autism to your other children, remember to be specific to their siblings' particular experience and really explain the behavior in terms of motivation and purpose. For example, if your child with autism stims in a certain way, like rocks back and forth or repeats certain noises, explain that they might do this to calm down or to feel safe. It's just like asking for a hug or playing on the swings to wind down. And siblings might understand their brother or sister's autism behaviors better by comparing them to their own feelings and actions. For example, if your children with autism get excited, without autism get excited, they might express themselves by telling you how excited they are. On the other hand, your child with autism might flap their hands to express the same feelings because their brain works differently. And finally, your response is likely to influence the way that your children see their siblings. So if your children notice how compassionate and accepting you are, in spite of difficult circumstances, they'll be more likely to be the same way. And so then having an understanding of their siblings' diagnosis can help the siblings feel more comfortable when having to explain it to others, interacting with their sibling, and understanding that what their sibling, or just understanding what their sibling with autism is going through. And so children are very aware when things are not equal between siblings. They know when one child is getting more time and attention, when they're getting special toys, special teachers, fewer chores, when their sibling gets away with things that they don't, and things just don't seem fair. So it might be helpful to teach them that that fair doesn't always mean equal. And this graphic is a nice representation of that, where on the left, everybody is getting equal resources. So everybody gets one box of the same size to kind of prop up and try to see the baseball game. But you see it's not very fair because the shortest one of them cannot see the game at all. Whereas on the right, the resources aren't distributed equally, but it's fair because then all the kids get to see the baseball game. And so either way, when your children do feel this way, that it's not fair, it is important to address the frustrations as they come up. So your children without autism will need to be reassured that they are just as important and as loved as their sibling with autism. And it might be, it also might help to explain that the siblings' playtime in therapy can actually be a lot of hard work for them. And so it's probably not as fun as it looks. One thing that might help is to give one-on-one time for all children, for each sibling. And even though it might be difficult to schedule, even short periods, like 5 minutes of undivided attention can be effective. You can also try to bring them along on certain errands or buying groceries. That car time is really a great time to check in and have that undivided attention with one of your children. And then give every child some chores as appropriate. So just ensuring that everybody does something to help out, no matter how simple it might be. If your child with autism has difficulty doing certain things, maybe something as simple as placing the napkins on the table for a meal. And finally, just recognizing that each sibling might react differently to having a sibling on the spectrum. One sibling could, naturally step into a sort of nurturing kind of role, whereas another one could want to have nothing to do with their sibling with autism. So it would be good to keep your expectations flexible and try not to assume that one child's reaction will be the same as another's. And again, always just acknowledge each child's feelings, regardless of how different they are. And then kids will eventually come to understand that their sibling with autism might require more of your attention, but that doesn't mean that they get more of your love. So there are some challenges when you get out into the public. It's natural for siblings to embarrass each other, but when the embarrassment is coming from or stems from autism behaviors, the siblings might feel guilty for feeling embarrassed. So you have to let them know that it's okay to feel embarrassed, validate them that the stemming, the meltdowns, the things that might seem odd to strangers, they are things that are hard to deal with. And just it could be helpful to help them explain or guide them in explaining autism to others. In practice, you can try role playing. You can also say that to them that it's okay not to say anything. Sometimes things don't require explanations, and it's okay also to ignore others if they're rude or if they're staring, and that there are always people who won't understand. Some other challenging things that might come up are special events or holidays or going out. Could be for a variety of reasons, sensory issues, just difficulties with social situations in general, or having that rigidity and routine. And so siblings might become upset at the child with autism, if they have meltdowns, or if the whole family can't go to a special event together, or if a holiday gets cut short. And so these are some of things that you could do to try to work around. If a holiday gets cut short, you can try arranging it so that the sibling can still enjoy their favorite part of the trip. You can consider looking into a babysitter or respite care on special occasions for the siblings, like awards, ceremonies, or an important game. And if that's not possible, you can kind of arrange for the event to be recorded and then watch it together later with the sibling on their one-on-one time. And so friends and peers, that can be challenging for your children without autism to merge their home life with their outside life, like with their friends and school. And they might get questions about, peers asking questions and helping them with explaining to their peers or how to explain the autism to their peers would be helpful. And then for play dates, something like play dates, establishing boundaries where your child with autism might play in a different room than where the play date is occurring. And sometimes, that can't happen, and really encouraging the siblings to be open with their friends about what to expect when they come to their house. And really just encouraging siblings to respect the child with autism's difficulties and differences, and knowing that love, acceptance, and patience is required on everyone's part. So other challenges, negative feelings. The sibling may be dealing with a lot of difficult feelings like anger, resentment, guilt, loss, and they might not know how to cope with these feelings. And then in addition, they might be afraid to talk to you about it because they think that they might burden you or sound negative toward their sibling with autism. But you can assure them that it's really okay to feel, to have that negative feeling, and to acknowledge that those feelings are valid, and really share your own struggles and your feelings with them, to keep that open line of communication, and so that they feel comfortable sharing with you as well. And remind them that all siblings have moments when they fight and when they don't get along. So, and encourage them to accept the difficulties, but then also appreciate the quirks. Everyone is different, and there's something to appreciate in every single person. Thinking about the future. So especially as children get older, they might start to ask questions about where their sibling with autism fits into their future. And so it would be good to keep an open communication and involve the siblings in any planning process, especially if your child with autism will need care in the future. It's important that you listen to your other children's thoughts concerning the matter. And whatever decisions they decide to make, that you help guide them, and also reassure them, and help, and that will allow them to feel more comfortable about whatever the future holds, and for themselves and for their siblings. So aggressive behaviors. So aggression isn't always a symptom of autism, but when it is usually a source of a lot of stress, tension, and fear within families. And so siblings might ask why their brother and sister gets away with being aggressive. They might have, again, different feelings of anger or confusion or even fear if they see their sibling with autism hitting a family member, or even hitting the sibling themselves. And so it would be good to explain that it might be difficult for the child with autism to express themselves when they're hurt or bothered. And again, validate feelings. Yes, it is scary, and we want to make plans for prevention so that the siblings do feel safe in the home. And so relationships between siblings. So sometimes it is harder for children to bond with their sibling with autism. So it might be helpful for parents to be the facilitators of opportunities for siblings to play together and to find common interests. For instance, if one child loves geology and the other one loves to run around outside, you can look for those overlaps so that maybe they can go for a walk together and look for cool rocks. And it's also important, being a sibling of someone with autism can feel like a full-time job sometimes. And so that time apart is really important as well, having their own activities and their own clubs that they're a part of. Being part of support groups for siblings of children with disabilities is also sometimes very helpful. It gives children time to vent, space to vent, and really even to get advice on how to deal with some of the issues that they're experiencing. So the Sibling Support Project has a couple of resources or a couple of groups that sort of get together. Sib Shops is a peer support group that is all around the country. So you can go to the website to see if there's one near where you live. And then Sib Teen is a Facebook group. It's a restricted Facebook group. So a lot of teens can go there to kind of also find that peer support. Sibs.org also has a lot of resources, sibs.org.uk, a lot of resources for both, disclosing diagnoses as well as sibling support as well. So I just want to end by acknowledging that families impacted by autism do go through a lot of challenges and many sacrifices, but also come out with many amazing experiences. And with your support, your children without autism can also can learn to grow alongside their brother and sister with autism. And so leaving you guys with this quote or these quotes, what parents are saying about their children without autism. Starting from the bottom, she has become a great advocate for other kids who have special needs. She shows kindness and respect for other students in her class with autism. She has learned to be flexible and patient. And then he's a very patient person, very accepting of others with disabilities or problems. He's always the one in his peer group to reach out to help or encourage somebody. And the one on top, she's absolutely amazing. I've never seen a more compassionate child her age. She treats her peers so wonderfully and has reached out to so many kids with behavioral and developmental challenges on her own. For her brother, she is his greatest teacher and his biggest fan. When he learns something new, no one is more proud and excited than her. All right, so and then we have a couple of slides of resources. And so these are our books, the Survival Guide for kids with autism spectrum disorder and their parents, and the Ask for Kids Secret Book of Social Rules, the Handbook of Not So Obvious Social Guidelines for Tweens and Teens with Asperger's Syndrome. So those are a couple of books for the children with autism, and then for their siblings, we also have a couple of resources that would be helpful for them as well. And these are some other resources on autism, and this website, Getting Started Here, introducing your child to his or her diagnosis of an autism spectrum disorder, has a whole list of resources that you can access as well. And these are other online resources and advocacy organizations. Okay, and this is just a little plug for a research study that is going on. So UM-NSU CARD is partnering with the Safari Simons Foundation Autism Research Initiative to do this really massive online autism study to kind of speed up the autism research and advance our understanding of autism. And so anybody, any families with an individual with autism can participate. So the individuals with autism, as well as biological parents and biological siblings, are encouraged to participate. The registration is super easy and can be done entirely online. All you have to do is provide a saliva sample. They'll send the kits home for you to provide that sample, and then you can complete online surveys. And then there might be some follow-up research studies that they might invite you to participate in as well. If you complete the registration and return the samples, you'll get a $50 up to $50 gift card via code. So if you're interested, you can go to this website, sparkforautism.org/card. And there's also information for the local Spark team, spark@miami.edu, and there's the phone number as well. Okay, and this is just the survey. If you're interested and you have time to provide us with feedback, here's a link to our survey and the QR code as well. So that is the end of our presentation portion. So I will turn off the recording and